Now, Canvas is having problems today. I tried to email all of you the Zoom link. In fact, I tried twice and I don't know why I was unsuccessful. So I decided on plan C, which is to record today's lecture and provide it for all of you. I'm going to try to do that now. Don't forget the deadline to submit Open Book Quiz 3, Monday, October 28th, 8 a.m. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly because you should be able to pause so that you may write. We're talking about World War II. Remember, the Allies invaded Normandy. General Eisenhower is the supreme commander. The Allied Expeditionary Force, Operation Overlord, succeeds landing on the 5 beaches of France in that region called Normandy. The Americans and the British and their allies in the West advance on Germany toward the east, and the Soviets advance on Germany from the east, marching west, and we squeeze the Germans. They wind up surrendering in May of 1945. Germany is divided into 4 occupation zones. The city of Berlin itself is divided into 4 sectors. The Soviets are in the eastern sector, the French, the British, and the Americans are in the western sectors of Berlin. The city of Berlin, the German capital. Cooperation with the Soviets, very difficult. Roman numeral 4, the war in Asia, island hopping. Distance was a major factor in America's Europe first strategy because we had no base near Japan to serve as a staging area, the way that England had for Europe, an Operation Overlord. So the United States approached Japan for an eventual invasion through something called island hopping, the island hopping campaign. The United States used Pacific islands as stepping stones to approach Japan for an eventual invasion. In this map, you can see all of this yellow territory, which represents territory controlled by Japan in 1942. We looked at a similar map before, I think, was it orange? The territory controlled by Japan was orange. Here it's yellow. But the starbursts represent battles, and these green lines and arrows and thrusts show American successes. So the American troops would land at an island controlled by Japan, engage in vicious fighting, inflict massive casualties, killing many more times the Japanese than Americans who died, and then hop to the next island and do it again, and do it again, and do it again, as we are slowly moving toward the home islands of Japan for an eventual invasion of Japan. I just realized I'm not sharing the screen. I'm out of my routine, everybody. Apologies. Oh, good night, nurse. There we go. As I was saying, island hopping. Feels like Monday. Distance, major factor. We had no base of operations near Japan to serve as a staging area, as England had served as a prelude to Operation Overlord. So the way we were going to approach Japan was going to be very difficult, very different. The United States pursued that island hopping campaign, using Pacific Islands as stepping stones as we attempt to get closer and closer and closer to the home islands of Japan for an eventual invasion of Japan. Just as we had invaded Europe, we believed we were going to have to invade Japan, landing troops there. So there you see the island hopping campaign. Now you see it. The island hopping campaign beginning here at Pearl Harbor, we fought a ship-to-ship battle at Midway, but then we began the island hopping campaign. We're in the Gilbert Islands and Guadalcanal down here. As we advance slowly toward Japan. All right, we need to make that a little bit small. All right, Potsdam Declaration. The last wartime conference was the Potsdam Conference. We talked about the Yalta Conference in February 1945, shortly before Germany surrendered. Decisions were made there about the division of Germany and Berlin following Germany's surrender. Potsdam Conference is held in the summer of 1945, so late July, early August, and on July 27, 1945, the Allies issued the Potsdam Declaration to Japan, promising utter destruction to Japan unless Japan surrendered. You see in this photo from left to right, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the new American president, Harry Truman, Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. You only need to know the bold words from the Potsdam Declaration, Articles 3 and 13. You only need to know the bold words. Only write the bold words. Potsdam Declaration promised utter devastation of the Japanese homeland if Japan did not surrender. Article 13, which was the final article of the Potsdam Declaration issued in late July 1945 to the Japanese, called on the government of Japan to unconditionally surrender. The alternative for Japan is prompt and utter destruction. So the Potsdam Declaration calls on Japan to surrender or face utter devastation, prompt and utter destruction. And the Japanese refused to surrender. Japan refused. Additionally, not only did Japan refuse to surrender, but Japan planned for millions of its citizens to fight to the death against American invaders, even issuing a booklet to its people explaining that they needed to fight to the death using primitive weapons like kitchen knives, sharpened bamboo spears, and rocks. The People's Handbook of Resistance Combat, calling on 100 million Japanese to die defending the homeland. Well, President Truman has a very important decision to make at Potsdam. The American president, Harry Truman, authorized dropping an atomic bomb on Japan anytime after August 2nd. That would give them time to wrap up the meeting, and then President Truman would be on his way home by ship from Potsdam. Well, President Truman received word during the Potsdam Conference that the Manhattan Project, which is the top secret American atomic bomb project, had succeeded in detonating successfully an atomic bomb. And President Truman decided to use it against the Japanese. And so he authorized dropping an atomic bomb on Japan anytime after August 2nd. Well, August 6, 1945, the United States dropped an atomic bomb on the Japanese city Hiroshima, or you may hear it pronounced Hiroshima. This first atomic bomb instantly destroyed the city, and the Hiroshima bomb killed at least 140,000 people by the end of the year. Some were killed immediately, others were injured so badly that they lingered and died from wounds, died from radiation poisoning. One bomb killed 140,000 people by the end of the year, destroyed a city and killed 140,000 people. That first atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima was dropped on August 6th. Japan did not surrender. So 3 days later, the United States dropped a second atomic bomb. This time on the Japanese city, Nagasaki. This bomb killed 70,000 people by the end of the year. And Japan offered to surrender the next day. August 10, 1945. What was President Truman's rationale for dropping the bomb? It was very controversial at the time and remains a controversial decision. The only time a nuclear bomb has been used against an adversary, and the United States did it twice against Japan in August 1945 at the end of World War II. What was President Truman's rationale? How did he justify dropping an atomic bomb that would kill so many people, including lots of civilians, including women and children? Truman's military commanders estimated that an invasion of Japan would probably result in somewhere between 250,000 and 500,000 Allied deaths. Between 250,000 and 500,000 Allied deaths. President Truman later wrote in his memoirs that he could not stomach that thought. If there was a way to end the war sooner, if there was a way to end the war quickly and save American lives, he wanted to do that. And because he wanted to end the war quickly as possible, and save American lives, he decided to drop the atomic bomb on Japan, hoping to force a Japanese surrender, which it did, though it took 2 atomic bombs being dropped on Japan to accomplish that. But it did accomplish that. All right, next up. So World War II ends, and just as soon as World War II ends, a new conflict begins, called the Cold War. An approximately 45-year conflict between the Soviet Union and the communist East versus the United States and the democratic West. And the Cold War came about largely because of World War II and the way that World War II ended. Because when World War II ended, the Soviet Union was largely in control of Central and Eastern Europe because of events that happened before the United States and the Soviet Union became allies, and events that happened after the two nations became allies during the war. The Cold War begins. Roman numeral 1, the Truman Doctrine and the Marshall Plan. Remember, Germany is divided. at the end of World War II. 4 occupation zones. The Soviet Union occupies the eastern zone of Germany, where the capital city of Berlin is. The Western occupation zones see the British, the French, and the Americans occupying those. Iron Curtain speech. March 1946, former British Prime Minister Winston Churchill delivered a speech in President Truman's home state of Missouri, in the city of Fulton, Missouri, at Westminster College. And in that speech at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, in March 1946, almost a full year after the war ended, Churchill introduced the term Iron Curtain. Churchill said that an iron curtain has descended across the continent, meaning Europe, dividing East and West, East Europe from West Europe. We know what a curtain is, something that divides, but he called it an iron curtain, an immovable curtain drawn by the Soviet Union, because Europe was divided and the Soviets controlled Eastern Europe. And what Churchill informed his American audience, both in person and more broadly by the media that covered it, was that we don't know exactly what's going on behind that iron curtain, but it appears that the Soviet Union has taken control of Eastern Europe. Because what happened was, during the war, as the Soviet troops, as the Red Army marched west, fighting against the Germans, marching toward Germany, where the Soviet troops went, the Soviet government forced communism to follow. Here is President Truman. Here is Prime Minister Churchill at Fulton, Missouri, at Westminster College for that Iron Curtain speech. It's not what Churchill called it. Churchill called it the sinews of strength speech, but the American public called it, the American media called it the Iron Curtain address. Some say this is when the Cold War started. Well, in a sense, the Cold War was a non-event. It's called cold because the United States and the Soviet Union were never officially at war with each other, but the threat of war existed. But since we were never officially at war with each other, it's hard to give a start date to a war that never started in the first place. Some say the Iron Curtain speech kicked off the Cold War. I would argue it started by the end of World War II, as the Soviet Union was ignoring promises made at Yalta about free elections and territory and self-government. When Churchill said an Iron Curtain had descended across the continent of Europe, he's talking about this red line. The Soviets marched west, the Soviet army, the Red Army marched west, fighting against Germany. Now, the Soviets had already gone into eastern Poland, but by now the Soviets were in control of all of Poland, as well as East Germany and Czechoslovakia and Hungary and Romania and Bulgaria. And the Soviet troops went into those territories and forced the people to accept communist governments. And so these countries became communist countries that received their marching orders from the Soviet Union, from Moscow, from the communist government there. To the west of this red line, to the west of the Iron Curtain, countries were free to govern themselves, to choose how they would be governed. In the East, not so much, because people who lived in communist countries lost their political liberty. There was only one legal political party, the Communist Party, and the Communist Party governed all of these countries with an iron fist, just like the Communist Party governed the Soviet Union with an iron fist. Well, fast forward to 1947. Communists attempted to seize control of Greece, the country Greece. And in the United States, our fear was that if Greece fell to communists, Turkey would be next, and then the rest of Europe would follow. Remember, if you look on this map, remember, red equals communism. Greece and Turkey are not red. The United States did not want them to become red. We wanted to avoid a red takeover, a communist takeover. Now, in Greece, the threat was internal. There were Greek communists who were attempting to overthrow the Greek government. The threat to Turkey was external. It was coming directly from the Soviet Union, who wanted a military presence in Turkey. Our concern was that if Greece fell, Turkey would be next, and then they might run the table and spread communism to the rest of Europe. So we did not want that to happen. So the United States had to intervene. The British government had troops in Greece, and that was the only thing preventing a communist takeover of Greece and the Greek government. But the British government was broke. Remember, they had needed Lend-Lease help during the war. Well, they were going to bring their British troops home from Greece because it was expensive to keep them there. And so they informed the Americans, we're leaving. We're taking our troops out of Greece. Well, our concern was as soon as the British troops left Greece, then Greece would fall to communists. So that's when President Truman met with the congressional leaders and said, we need to help out Greece and Turkey with some aid so they don't fall to communism. So in March of 1947, President Truman formally asked the Congress for immediate aid for Greece and for Turkey. And he announced a new doctrine for the United States, a new foreign policy. Whenever you hear an American president's last name followed by the word doctrine, it usually means national defense, foreign policy. Foreign policy, national defense. Well, the Truman Doctrine was the same, just like the Monroe Doctrine had been announced by President Monroe saying Europeans stay out of our hemisphere. President Truman issued the Truman Doctrine in March of 1947. In the speech, President Truman said, I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures. Armed minorities referred to the situation in Greece. Outside pressures referred to the situation in Turkey. So there you see President Truman addressing the United States Congress in March of 1947, asking the Congress to authorize $400 million of aid for Greece and Turkey. And in the process, he's announcing a new American foreign policy, Truman Doctrine. The Truman Doctrine was this: wherever a non-communist government was threatened by communism, by takeover, by subjugation, the United States would supply political, economic, and, if necessary, military aid. The Congress complied, and in May of 1947, the United States sent $400 million in aid to Greece and Turkey, and it worked. And the Truman Doctrine included a very important Cold War policy, the policy of containment. If you get sick, we tell you to stay home, don't go out in public because we want to contain the illness. We don't want it to spread. In 1947, the appearance was that the Soviet Union was intent on spreading communism, on attempting to take over its neighbors and further spread communism. Remember, Marx himself had called for revolution everywhere and anywhere. Well, then the communists take power in Russia, and Russia becomes the Soviet Union, and more territory is dominated, is conquered, is acquired, and communism spreads, including into these Eastern European countries. And now Greece and Turkey are under threat. Well, the United States wanted to stop the spread of communism. We wanted to contain it. The Cold War policy of containment, begun during the Truman presidency, was intended to stop the spread of communism, to stop the spread of Soviet communism. Roman numeral II, the Marshall Plan and the National Security Act. That may be a great place to stop for today. So I'm going to stop there for today. Hopefully you'll be able to see all of this. I'm going to attempt to stop the recording and then upload it and provide it for you, maybe in Canvas once Canvas is working, so that we do not get behind. I hope to see all of you on Wednesday. Don't forget, the deadline to submit open book quiz number 3, Monday, October 27, 8 a.m. So 1 week from today, I'm recording this on Monday, October 20th. You have until Monday, October 27 at 8 a.m. to submit open book quiz number 3.